Welcome to the Flourish podcast, where we talk about healthy, holistic, and reflective children's and youth ministry, brought to you by Wonderful Me and The Resource. My name is Lisa Campbell. I'm joined by Ali Campbell. We always like to make it clear we are married, just in case we have, I don't know, any little disagreements throughout the episode. This is episode 3 of the first series of the Flourish podcast. We are exploring all things to do with the Flourish model at the moment. And in this week, we are really going to dig into and unpack the why of children's and youth ministry in the Flourish model. That's our roots, what roots us, what helps us be nourished and grow and hold fast. So, Al, I feel like we've talked about the why in lots of different ways in every episode so far. So I think when we sat down to do this, we were like, what, we've got to do another whole episode on the why. But I think that's because there's loads to say, isn't there?
There is. There is quite a lot to say. Um, so when we were chatting about it before, I thought of a story that links with kind of what I think brings it to life for me in terms of thinking about my why. And funnily enough, you talked about the word enthusiasm the other day, and ages ago, I'd done a blog that was about called Teabag Theology.
Sorry, just for anyone that's been involved in children's ministry for a very, very long time, um, you may be sat with the same song now going around in your head. So I just thought I'd like share the love. And if it wasn't going around in your head, then I'm definitely sharing the love and you can join in. Do you remember the Captain Alan Price song? Was it Captain Alan Price who did I'm Enthusiastic?
Oh, boing,
Boing,
boing, boing. Yeah, yeah.
boing. So whenever I hear the word enthusiasm, I literally do a little dance in my head. I'm enthusiastic. Boing, boing, boing.
I
Anyway,
think it's fantastic. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it just dates us. It dates us a lot. But for other listeners out there who are as old as we are, come and join the party and
It
post
only
it down.
dates us to the mid 90s.
I know, which is really, I mean, in my head, it was just a couple of weeks ago. But
Mhm.
anyway, that's another whole conversation. So
So,
I interrupted you because you
yeah,
said the word enthusiasm. Why were you talking about
so the
enthusiasm?
root the root of the word enthusiasm is entheos, so literally in God. Um, and there's something there for me about our passions and our kind of what's right at the heart of our kind of why is that kind of enthusiastic passion that God set within us. And that, in part that's the Holy Spirit He's given us, but also how that connects with who we are, who He's made us to be. So for me, that's kind of I think about that in terms of my why. So I wrote this blog post called Teabag Theology. And in it, I'm basically saying, imagine that the Holy Spirit is the tea bag and you are the water in this mug. And I use the illustration of making a cup of tea for my mum when I was about 5. And I had no idea how to boil the kettle. I just put the water in, which I'd seen. I think my dad maybe did that once in his life, made a cup of tea. Anyway, maybe we'll cut that. No, we won't. Anyway, moving on. I made this cup of tea for my mum, poured the water in, and it was just cold water. And so stirred the tea bag for ages, thinking nothing is happening to the tea bag. I thought it went brown. And then I put milk in, and it was just milky water, and the tea bag just sat there, feeling very sad. But then I still brought the cup. I took the tea bag out and then took the cup to my mum. And obviously, she did what I think was a little bit similar to kind of Monica in Friends when they had the meal that they didn't like, where they all go, mmm. So I think she did
Oh,
that when she had the
the
cup of tea,
classic Rachel trifle
the Rachel
episode.
Price disaster. So anyway, my mum did that, and I just didn't understand why the tea, but the water was cold. So had the tea bag, that hadn't done anything without kind of that the two things connecting. So I think we come alive when we're operating in our why, and that kind of passion just comes out of us, like when you infuse, which is also another root linked with in God. So when we're infused with God, then it just comes out. But it's kind of the connection between God's Holy Spirit, Him living inside us, and why He's made us, and kind of those two things connecting. So our sweet spot, if you like, is that kind of why. So yeah, for me, that next year, that's going to be 40 years so far in terms of just my sense of calling and pursuing my why. But I
And
thought
I love
that kind
it.
of, yeah,
Yeah, and it's such a good reminder, isn't it? Like that should be where all passion comes from, like because of Jesus and because of that encounter with Jesus and the infilling of his Holy Spirit. Like that is, it's that bubbling out of us that is passion and that is enthusiasm. So yeah, it's a really good reminder. I came across a quote by a kind of, I think he's a theologian. You'll know more than this about than me. Frederick Buechner, is that right?
Treasure Buchner, yeah,
Is he a theologian?
he is a theologian. Yeah.
And there's a quote by him that I came across that says that our vocation in life is where your greatest joy, I'm reading it because I wrote it down, thought it might be useful, and you've led nicely into it. Your vocation in life is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. And it is that kind of our why is that sweet spot that you've just talked about, where we see a massive need, but also God breaks our heart, but also we recognize all this stuff that God's put in us that we love and we enjoy doing, just kind of bubbles up. And actually, I've got something to bring in that space. And when those two come together, it's like you're really in the sweet spot, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And I think when you're talking about your why, I feel like in a youth work perspective and space, I've had so many conversations with young people who are like, "What is my why?" Like, I don't. What am I supposed to do? Like, there's so much pressure put on our kids and young people nowadays, isn't there? Like to have your kind of like life all mapped out from the age of, I don't know, 13, 14, and you're making your option choices and everything's leading to somewhere. And I remember one of our girls, I can't remember which one, but just had a real existential crisis at the age of like 12, 13 of like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. It's like, that's okay. You're 12 and it's going to come out. But we are thing in that and with any young person that we've had those conversations with, what I always say in that space is you just got to keep doing what you love, because I think God puts passions in us that are kind of godly and that are directed by him, and you just keep doing what you love, then I think you can't go very far wrong from that when your heart is in a space to serve God and honor him.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a myth about kind of your why or what God calls you to is going to has to be something you hate, otherwise
Yeah, yeah.
called you.
It's like that is so weird. How does that align with
I
fullness of
don't know.
life that God calls us to? I'm going to call you to have fullness of life, and you're going to be filled with joy and peace and presence, but it's going to be a narrow road, and it's going to be all things that you hate, and like,
Ultimately, you're going to hate what you do.
yeah,
That
yeah.
because that's part of the calling. It's not.
No, I'm with
No,
you.
no.
I'm with you totally. Cool. So yeah, the why. That's what we're that's what we're exploring. I think for us, this is a journey that personally we've kind of been on over the last couple of years, isn't it? Just kind of really exploring our why, and kind of tied up with that is the word values. I think what are our values and what do we hold? Which for me was definitely a word that massively came on my radar, probably about 4 years ago. And I guess I was working at a time in a job that I was kind of it was there were challenges and kind of new leadership and just kind of when you just feel, I think we talked a bit last week about the rub, and there was definitely a bit of a rub what's going on. And I was talking to well, I had some coaching actually, and the lady that I was doing coaching with just said, have you thought and explored about your values and your line manager's values, and where are they at, how do they align? And it just wasn't really something that was massively on my radar to that extent at that point. And then I feel like over the years, it just keeps coming back. And so we kind of have sat with it and explored it to a certain extent. And then last year, I read the Miranda Hart book. Haven't been entirely honest with you, which if anyone is listening and they haven't read it, I massively, massively recommend. She is just an icon, as our girls would say. She's totally brilliant. And actually, for me, I just found it a book that was so full of Jesus. In fact, she kind of goes on to explore all of these treasures that she talks about. So the book is basically a story of her journey through chronic health or chronic illness, I should say, and kind of exploring kind of well-being really within that. And she kind of comes across these different treasures throughout her journey. But when you look at the treasures, there each one of them is a kind of name taken from the fruit of the spirit. So it's just this journey to discovering. Anyway, sorry. Oh, the podcast is not about the book, although it easily could be because it's brilliant. So get it if you haven't read it. But one of the things she talks about, one of the treasures in that is kind of finding purpose and your values and kind of living to your values. So we started exploring it a little bit more, and as we kind of are shaping things that we're doing together, just like, oh well, how do we articulate our values? So we came across Brene Brown has a kind of whole list on her website that's free to look at of a kind of, I think there's about 60, maybe even 80 different values words. And we sat down, had a coffee, set aside a day a few months ago and just went, right, what do we do? How do we explore this? Yeah, Al, do you want to talk about our journey in that a little bit?
Well, I
Because I've
think
been talking a lot.
what I remember was you selecting, like, I don't know, half of the kind of list because it was difficult for you to kind of miss some things out. And I don't know whether it was the way my brain was working at the time, but I just did about the kind of 12 or whatever it was we were asked to do.
Yeah,
And
we kind of looked at the list, didn't we, and went through with a highlighter. Which ones resonate with us? Mine was full of highlighter. Yours was very succinct. You were very clear.
I was
Simple.
quite succinct, but I think um, some of that, I guess, is linked a little bit with things that have been there since I started the resource. So, for those who don't know, I started the resource back in 2014, so 11 years it's been running. And one of the things that was there at the beginning of it starting was I just wanted to be adding value to people in ministry. So, for me, that became a really clear underpinning value of why the resource existed. But then I realized it's also what I've been trying to do pretty much since I started in youth and children's ministry is trying to add value to the lives of children and young people, be somebody who's going to champion and cheer them on. And that kind of underpinned the way in which I then approached it. So that's always been there as a value. I just guess sometimes we don't articulate our values. So what the Brené Brown thing did really helpfully was give us the actual words you might find hard to kind of put it into words, but there you are. You've one of them's going to resonate because there's so many, but it did help then kind of distill it down. So I found it really helpful. And that kind of the kind of future generations thing came out quite high. And the making a difference, so that adding value, those two things for me linked.
Mm.
And that kind of just made me realize I've been living this why. I just don't know that I've articulated it. And then so it hasn't come into focus for me, apart from just more recently as we've talked about it.
Yeah, and I guess as we were doing it, I think we both were like, "Oh, actually, this is really key," and we found it super, super helpful. So what we then tried to do was kind of create a little bit of a like, if anyone else wants to do this, because I think the more we sat with it, the more we talked about it. A lot of what we talked about last week was that, the more we realized how important it is, and the more we realized how where there is a rub, where there is a problem, when you really look at it and you unpick it, at the root of it is often a values issue. So it's super, super key and being able to articulate it. But I guess what we discovered as we did it and looked at kind of different advice from different people on how you identify your values, what you do, and I guess what came out of it for us was actually there's the word values is used in lots of different spaces in lots of different ways to mean lots of different things. So I guess we kind of came up with four types of values, didn't we, when we did the activity? So the first thing we noticed was like belief and faith was key. And we were like, but actually everything comes out of that. So having that as one of our, I think we were encouraged the way we started doing it was to kind of get it down to your top two. And we were like, but faith belief is almost like a given for us. What that doesn't feel like it's one of two. It just feels like it underpins everything. So we kind of took that out and went, okay, so if that's the case, that is a core value, but how does that work out? So we kind of called that box passion. So we came up with four P's because we quite like a little acronym or a what's the word when you've got with all the same letters?
Alliteration.
Alliteration, thank you. I thought it began with P, but no, I was coming up with four P's. Anyway, so we came up with four P's. So we looked at passion, purpose, principles, and person. And I guess what we identified as we kind of looked at how that aligned with the Flourish model was passion and purpose, and we'll dig into it in a sec. But passion and purpose very much aligned with the why, and then principles and person very much aligned with the how. And kind of all of that is a values piece, but values in different ways. So so we took P for passion as kind of like our faith, and we were like, okay, so what fuels our passion? What's the stuff we feel God has called us to? And we kind of thought, what are some key Bible verses that we feel God has drawn our attention to that we've kind of lived. So that was our first kind of value around our passion and what really fires us up. And then the other part of our why was then what's our purpose. So to do that, we got this list of values. We whittled them all down to kind of like 10 to 15. And then we whittled those down and went, right, what's the top two? And like you've just said, actually, for both of us, we kind of settled on the same two, which is fun because we're doing life together. And I don't think that has to be the case, but it worked for us. So yeah, future generations and making a difference. And that together kind of formed our how, what we feel called to do and what we believe in, was a way of kind of really identifying and articulating that for us.
Mm. Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the, I'm just, this is, I hope this isn't an aside, but John Westhoff talks about how beliefs are taught, but faith is lived. And I think sometimes there can be a rub against, we can have values, but we find there isn't a place to express it, which comes back to what we we're talking about is where there's a rub against kind of things that we kind of, well, I want to put this into practice. I want to make this part of, because it so lives within us. It's what we want to do, out of that kind of why. But the idea of kind of here's these beliefs I have about things. And John Westhoff talks about, but faith is lived. So it's what we can then live alongside others. And is there a way of expressing our why through the way that we kind of join in with life in a community, whether that's church or anywhere else, or family life, what that looks like in practice is where the why gets its kind of is manifest, if you like. And I think we can have stuff that just sits in here as a kind of all good ideas, like churches with slogans around their kind of values,
Yeah, I was just going to say.
but they're not actually expressed in the way they go about doing things.
Yeah, I came across a quote recently that said, values are something you do, not something you have. And I was just like, which is so true. But actually then sitting with my kind of probably experience before going on this journey of values was values of a church, like your kind of like pithy little slogan, that sticks at the front, but that is like often very rarely referred to and is stuck up as this is what our values are. And it's like, actually, is it your values or is it your intention? Which is so super different from your values, because your values should be evident, a little bit like a kind of stick of Blackpool rock. You cut through it and that's what you see everywhere. Values shouldn't need to be articulated in some ways. It's super helpful when we do. But almost shouldn't need to, because it should just permeate out of all activity, because it's what you do as opposed to kind of just something you talk about, something you have, something you say. Um, and sometimes those kind of value statements really are just more about good intentions. This is what we'd like to do, um, which I think is a little bit different.
So I think that's where it's hard to articulate values, because if for you it's a bit like breathing, we're not conscious of breathing, we just do it. And we're not thinking about our breath going out and our breath coming in unless we're doing a breathing prayer or breathing exercise. But in terms of it's just how we live. And I think sometimes our values can be so core and we're trying to live out those things, but almost unconsciously, it just is who we are. Um, so I once worked with a brilliant 18-year-old who just who she was kind of demonstrable in every way you can imagine, in terms of she was a natural kids worker, but it just flowed out of her. But if I'd asked her to explain her why, or how she was going about, or what her values were, I think she'd have at the time found it very hard to put anything into words other than she was just being herself in some ways. And it's when we get a little bit older, or when we kind of take time to be reflective, not necessarily when we're older, it just is good to just notice those things and recognize what kind of undergirds what is root, what where our roots go down into something substantial, that enables us then to do what we do.
I also think it's why it's really helpful to do this kind of values activity with someone else. Like we did it together,
Mm.
and that was really helpful. I know my own mind. I'm not usually easily swayed, but but having highlighted half of the page at least on the initial, actually ones that I hadn't highlighted were all ones that ended up being in my final two, because then I talked to you and just was like, oh yeah, I'm really not thinking. So sometimes just getting our heads in the right space. I am definitely, as Al will know, a massive verbal process.
Yeah.
So just speaking it out is really helpful and kind of thrashing it out. So it's a helpful thing to do with someone else, I think, as an activity that you can kind of really gem. But I think the other thing in it is when you really look at a lot of the values words, I mean, we already mentioned the Miranda Hart book and how much of that is the fruit of the spirit. Um, uh, Lots of the value stuff is the fruit of the spirit. It's God stuff. It's good stuff. And actually, it gives us an opportunity sometimes because we are all becoming more like Jesus each day. Like we hope, we pray, we press in. And that's what we hope will be the work of the Spirit in our lives. And we all don't get it right all of the time, lots of the time for some of us. So I think sometimes doing this values piece, it allows you to, or allows the Holy Spirit to kind of shine a little bit of a light in areas of our lives that actually the values aren't really aligned with the values of Jesus that we read in the Bible. And it's like, oh, that's another little bit of me that I'm holding on tight to that I haven't really kind of opened up and invited God into. So I think there's a wider reason for doing this values piece because I think it allows us to really kind of explore our character and explore the areas in ourselves where we just know there's space for there to be more of Jesus.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also a really good thing to do as a team, like for you, kind of what's the why of what we are doing in this piece of work? Like if what we would say our why is to I don't know, create space for kids to explore the Bible, learn more about Jesus, and kind of, grow in their understanding of who he is. But then our what is that we're just going to kind of tell them a Bible story and move on without creating space for exploring. Then actually there's a misalignment between our why and our what there that really needs exploring because the what is not kind of living out what we say we're there to do. I don't know if that's a very good example. You
I
might have.
think the kind of well, I'm not going to say it's simpler than what you've just said, but for me, one of the things that was always encouraging and challenging at the same time is for me, it's kind of, are we creating space for children to encounter Jesus? Now, if I pack a program with activities to keep the kids busy, am I at all create? I might want to see them encounter Jesus, but I'm not creating any space for it unless it's mediated through the way I think they should meet with him. So they can meet with him through this activity I've done or this activity I've planned or that. But what if, actually we created space for them to encounter Jesus on their own terms? Now, for me, encountering Jesus is part of us coming into relationship with him, being transformed, and him meeting each child where they are. But we can be nervous about what that looks like. So we don't create space for it, even though we're saying, I really value it. I want young people to meet with Jesus. When, where, how? You haven't then kind of moved into that place where your why then becomes something tangible. And there can be all sorts of reasons for that.
Yeah,
One
yeah.
of
Which
the,
which is back to the rub, isn't it? Like that we've talked about. So you've got a rub, like I'm doing something, it's not working, and we can't quite work out why. Go back to your why and look at the disconnect that there is between your why and your what. And often that's why there's an uncomfortableness that what we're doing doesn't quite feel like it's what we want it to be. But exploring the why. So I think doing this kind of identifying your values is a really good thing to do as for individuals, like in our own personal space. I think it's a really good way of kind of making space for Jesus to there to be more of Jesus in our lives. But it's also a really good activity to do within your teams. Like, what is the why of what you're bringing? What's the passion that you've got? What's the purpose that you think you're there for? Is so super helpful. And looking at making space to notice the disconnect is really, really helpful.
yeah,
And then So that was the first two P's, passion, purpose. And then we were like, but that's not it. There's more than that. Because actually, like, so for me, my purpose was future generations and making a difference. Like, I know that that's what I'm wired for. And when I look back over the thread of what I've done, there's always been an element of that. And I think we talked about that last week. But also when there's a bit of a rub, like there was in this, in the job that I was in, some of that was a person rub. So another person which then moves into the how we do things. So as a person, I know that for me, learning is important. Excellence, doing things well is important. Wisdom is really, really important. Um, and so kind of what's the kind of how do you do things? What are the values that you hold as you as a person? But then also what are your principles? What are the values that you hold about the way that you approach things, how you go about it? So there's how you go about it as a person, but then how you go about it in the activities that you do. So for me, one of those is it's all about the one. I want to journey with the one. And so being in a space that was maybe more about growth and looking at working with lots of people, that was a real rub for me. So yeah, so the kind of the how we settled on what are your principles, what are the way in which you think things are important to go about, and a little bit about your person. And then when we did this out, what I loved about this activity was so I settled on a tool for my principles. I settled on a tool called PACE, which I do a lot of training on. It's really important. It's an acronym that stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So four values words around how I go about it. And you had your own, not acronym, but your own four words that you've kind of held from the beginning. And what I loved was how kind of aligned they were with kind of stuff
Yeah.
that's coming out now about how we journey well with kids that are struggling and that you've always just done really instinctively, which are really helpful.
So those are acceptance, love, guidance, and significance. Um, and I used when I was going for a job, I used them in a PowerPoint. This is going back 20 years ago, and they were things that were there. But I think because I was having to articulate something around what I was going to bring to a role, what I wanted to articulate most was the key thing I'm going to bring is my who I am and the values that have shaped me, because that then will shape the work. Now, I didn't articulate it like that, but I think instinctively that's what I knew was what I needed to present. So that's where those accepting young people as they are, loving them into being, who God's called them to be, guidance as opposed to kind of telling them, and what teaching looks like in that kind of context. And then creating a space of significance for children and young people to flourish. And so for me, and flourish even was a word before, for me, I was using that word quite a bit before the flourish model, which is why it's so exciting to see it be a thing that you've
Yeah.
kind of created. But I think that dynamic of kind of thinking through those things and then thinking, well, these have never changed. So something else for me about the why is I think while the way that we go about some of the work that we do and our approaches can shift, I do think often there's a core thing around our why that doesn't really change much. Trends come and go in terms of, what we're encouraged to think about when it comes to children and youth ministry. And a lot of those are to do with the what. What do we need to do now? Well, let's grab this resource or that resource or this tool. Um, but actually, at the end of the day, the way in which we're seeking to work with children and young people, a lot of that's not changed since I started. Um, we keep sometimes repackaging things, and look at it for a bit and think, hang on, no, this is the same. It's just beautifully designed, but it's the same. So I think the longer I've been doing it, the more I've realized that. One thing I did want to mention about
And
why,
because you are very old and have
um,
seen a lot.
so, but one of the things I noticed when we did so I did a survey back in 2019, which was basically looking terms and conditions. And so there was a why that I was asking the question, why is it that children and young people's ministry isn't valued in the way it should be, when the church has been employing them for a long time? And one of the statistics that blew us all away was we asked those that filled in the survey, over 500 people answered this question. If you could stay in children's youth ministry till retirement, if you could, would you? and 75% said they would if it was possible. And so coming back to why, I was like, there's a sense of calling and vocational conviction amongst lots of us that are involved in children's and youth ministry. We're not just doing it because the jobs come along. We're not just doing it because we happen to be working at this church or that church. Um, so I've been employed, I've been not employed in terms of working for a church. I can't but help be involved in children's and youth ministry because it's just what I feel like I'm on earth to do. So that kind of sense of your why, I think, is really important. So that stunned us in terms of that stat. But it's also there's a bigger why when we think about children's and youth ministry in the UK. It's like, how do we value this ministry that many of us feel like we're called to? And that's why I started Paraclesis
Mm.
a couple of years ago, was to kind of the why of that happening was we need to champion, there needs to be advocacy, we need to journey well with each other. And for many of us, we see this as a lifelong calling, not a thing to do until something else comes along. So that kind of conviction, commitment to, but it's the why that kind of drives that.
Yeah, so good. Thank you. And thanks for Paraclesis and all you do to champion children's and youth ministry. So yeah, that's our why. We've broached on the how. We're going to unpack that a little bit more. We kind of vaguely and quickly and briefly mentioned pace. Al mentioned acceptance, love, guidance, significance. And we'll definitely unpack that a little bit more when we get to next week, when we dig a bit deeper into the how. But I think that values piece that just overlaps into both the why and the how is really helpful to look at. And we kind of created a little tool from doing it. We did it more to go, how do we work through this? And then kind of thought, actually, it's possibly quite helpful for other people. So we're in the process of putting that together into a little resource that I hope will be available at some point in the new year. So yeah, keep an eye out. We'll let you know when that comes if it's helpful. But yeah, that's exploring the why. So we're drawing to the end of our episode 3, and we are starting to get into a little bit of a rhythm of handing over to Al for a little bit of a what's our take home? Give us a takeaway to take for this week that we can chew over for the rest of the week.
Um, I think with trying to begin to understand your why is pay attention to some of what you're instinctively doing, and maybe I would say for a week or two, just journal stuff that really excites you and gets you passionate, and you come away from something feeling so energized and alive. Just take even just a few minutes to jot down what is it about that that really has kind of set your heart racing. You think this is so fantastic. Um, and if you're not sure of how to articulate your why, maybe start there and think, what are you noticing about what you get passionate about? You don't want to miss, you want to be part of it, you want to be there. What's going on within you that is kind of driving that kind of engagement? And make some notes about it and then just pray about it. That's what I would suggest. Um, because it can feel like breathing. If you've been doing stuff for a long time, you can just, well, I just do what I do. I haven't really thought about it. But beginning to articulate it can illustrate then for you why you kind of fit in a particular place, why it makes sense to you to be doing this, and why when you're not doing it, you don't feel quite yourself.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. So yeah, that is episode 3. Tune back next week. We'll be on 4. We're nearly there, working through
Oh.
this Flourish model, and we'll unpack a little bit more some of the how as we get to that. But for now, have a really good week. Share this with your friends if that's helpful. Yeah, and have a chat and give us feedback. We'd love that too, if it's useful. Or if it's not, we'll take anything.
Subscribe. I was going to say subscribe.
We're rubbish at all of that stuff. But if it's useful, we hope you've enjoyed it. All right then, see you. Bye.